coming out again, enduring this. Thank you for coming. And Larry, would you lead us a word of prayer, please, sir? Man, I wanted to start you off with that quote there from Michael Denton, as you see. He says that all the evidence available in the biological sciences supports the core proposition of traditional natural theology that the cosmos is specifically or specially designed whole with the life and mankind as its fundamental goal and purpose. So he's an advocate, of course, of God's creation having been created specifically for man, and the more we learn about it, the more we see that. And the idea, you know, our government and governments of the world have spent billions, hundreds of billions of dollars trying to find life in other parts of the universe. And you got people who believe in UFOs and aliens. They don't exist. There's no other life in the cosmos except on Earth. And I say that with complete confidence because there's not another planet that we know anything about. The probability, and I'll try to show you that in a second, the probability that there's another planet in the cosmos that's like Earth that could support life like this is mathematically impossible. So anyway, let me skip forward. By the way, that's a black hole. You know, the black holes were first hypothesized just over 100 years ago. And people went, no. Initially, Einstein didn't believe it, and he came around. Well, now we have photographs of them with the James Webb Space Telescope and so forth. And at the center of almost all galaxies are black holes. And these black holes are collapsed dead stars. And the gravitation, they collapsed with such force that they created such dense material that nothing can escape it, including light. That's why they're black holes. Even light can't escape the gravitational pull of that dense material where these massive stars have died and collapsed. And I mentioned that before, the diameter of the cosmos estimated to be 93 billion light years, which is 5 septillion, 468 sextillion, 840 quintillion miles, if you know how much that is. That's more money than Larry has. And there's a diagram. I want to move forward from there. Some photographs, James Webb Telescope. Look at the concentration. This is just a tiny little speck in space that they're able to look at with this magnifying equipment and photograph. And those bodies, they're stars and they're galaxies, and they're light years apart, all of them. It's a massive area. And these are called globulus. They are masses of gas and dust from which stars are born. Stars are being born and dying all the time by the huge numbers. They last a certain length of time depending on the size and how hot they burn and so forth. And so stars constantly are born and die. And they've been able to see some of these where these stars are beginning to light up as they're formed and then as they die. And sometimes create these black holes. And so I'm going to buy this here. This is an illustration about how massive these things are. And this, Dr. Hugh Ross says the relation of electrons to protons, which is what's in molecules, which makes them function, is 1 to the 10 to the 37th power. And he said, so if you covered the entire North American continent in dimes up to the moon, 239,000 miles, and then pile dimes from here to the moon on 1 billion other continents the same size as North America, paint one dime red, mix it into the billion piles of dimes, blindfold a friend, ask him to pick out one dime, the odds that he could pick out the red dime are 1 in 10 to the 37th power. In other words, that's 10 followed by 37 zeros. So we try to put it in perspective for us. Paul Davies, a theoretical physicist who, by the way, is not a believer, says there is, for me, powerful evidence that there's something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. And so when you go back to Darwinism and all of that, where they say it just happened, he's saying, no, there's design. And so that's the argument against Darwinism, and the evidence against it is the complexity of God's creation and all the elements and all the various things in our universe. And even this man, Sir Fred Hoyle. Now, Fred Hoyle was a atheist who, because of his study of the universe, became an agnostic. Now, they still ain't getting to heaven. The difference in an atheist and an agnostic is, an atheist believes there is no God. An agnostic says, well, maybe. That's about the difference. And he said the common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. This is an atheist speaking, as he's looked at the creation and the cosmos. He's the one, by the way, that coined the phrase Big Bang, which he did derisively. And that's why a lot of people are afraid of it. And I like this one. He says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. What he's saying is, I'm scared to death that as we continue this research, we're going to discover that God created the cosmos. That's what he's saying. Let me move ahead here. There's our galaxy. By the way, there's an article this week that shows where some additional study has led astrophysicists to believe that our Milky Way galaxy is much, much bigger than they thought, because they've come up with better ways to measure it than we've had in the past. And there we are out there. I mentioned that before, that we're way out on one of the spiral wings of the galaxy. By the way, the galaxy's flat. Now, it's a tremendous distance from top to bottom, but it's flat. And it has these spiral rings around it because it spins constantly at an incredible speed. We can't see it because it's so vast. And so the Earth and our solar system is out there on one of those wings, if you will, that so we can see it all and study it. God's put us there where we can find it and see it. Let me move on through here. I got so much stuff on here, I can't cover everything. There was a couple of things. This man says that the long-term stability of the solar system remains a perplexing, unsolved issue because he don't want to admit that God in his power holds it together. And, of course, the skies proclaim the works of his hands, as the Bible tells us. By the way, that photograph of the moon was taken by Hartwell Lancaster. He loved to take photographs. I always liked that one. He took it in his backyard one night. Keep going here. There's a couple of things I wanted to show that I think I've missed, but we'll get on. Oh, here's one right here. Odds of the cosmos having another life-supporting planet are 1 in a million trillion. In other words, 10 to the 284th power. That's 10 followed by 284 zeros. It's not, and so that's why I put it up there. It ain't going to happen. It don't happen. There's no other life in the cosmos except on Earth. And that's God's design. Hangs the earth on nothing. Up until just 400 or 500 years ago, and there's still people who believe the earth is flat. And the Bible told us in Job again that he hangs the earth on nothing. It tells us it's a circle. It's all in the Bible, but that's been ignored, particularly by scientists. And the pale blue dot, what you see there is you see that little dot, that's the earth. That was taken on February 14th, 90, from 3.7 billion miles away by the Voyager 1 spacecraft. Carl Sagan petitioned NASA as Voyager 1 was about to leave the solar system. And he said, turn it around and take a photograph of the Earth while you can still see it. And they agreed, and they turned it around, and they took that photograph. And by the way, that's enlarged. And it became known as the pale blue dot. And so there we are. All of y'all were doing something when that photograph was taken from 3.7 billion miles away. Hopefully it was something good, all of you. And that just shows it and how it's... and then science versus religion. Religion, at least organized religion, has always resisted scientific discovery, always. And so there are people now, because they're afraid to... People are afraid to step out, devout people and say, well, this may be true, it may not be true. And then what happens over long periods of time is that science proves it to the point that even the church accepts it. Religions accept it. Most of them do, certainly ours do. This is one of them I mentioned this morning, the Boaji's void. It tells us in Job that above the earth is a great empty space, way back in Job. But we didn't find that out scientifically until 45 years ago, 1981. And it was named the Boaji's void. And there's where Job, it says in Job, that he stretches the north over the empty space. And that's directly above the North Pole. And it's incredibly massive. It's also known as the Great Nothing in scientific circles. And 700 light years from Earth, 330 million light years across. Now, to me, this is an example of God in our age, in our time, saying, I want to show you something. I had this written down in the book of Job thousands of years ago. You couldn't understand it then. But we've reached a point in time, this great technological age where there's so much skepticism, so much doubt, and science is a part of that. Scientists are a part of that. He said, I'm going to reveal these things to you. I want you to get some idea of my power and my creativity. And it only takes up, though, from our perspective, 0.27% of the diameter of the observable universe. Think about that. It's that far away. And I'm going to move past the telescope, development of the telescope, and how God has revealed His creation to us through that mechanism. And I want to get to here. Now, I've been reluctant for a long time, as I've mentioned, to teach on this, because a lot of people see this as going kind of along with Darwinism and evolution. It's not that. It's not anything about that. It's scientific discovery. And that scientific discovery, as I say over and over, is God's plan. There's no doubt in my mind about it. So God told us in Genesis 1:1 that in the beginning He created the heavens and the earth. But now in the 21st century, beginning in the 20th century, the 21st century, He says, I'm going to show you that. That's what I believe. That's my belief. You may see it differently. And so this was stumbled upon. Nobody had any idea about these things until we had some of the most brilliant minds that ever lived, and the ability scientifically, through the scientific method, to study these things. And so the universe, according to the Big Bang Theory, and it got that name, the Big Bang, as I said, from Fred Hoyle, who, when he first was heard about and discussed the Big Bang hypothesis, he thought it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. Now, this is an atheist and a brilliant man, and so he said, oh yeah, Big Bang. And it stuck. It's too bad because it could have been, but it fits. It describes it. So the Big Bang Theory teaches that the earth began about 13, not the earth, let me correct myself, the cosmos began about 13.7 billion years ago. And that there was a tremendous explosion of energy, matter, and light that brought the universe into existence. Well, does that not fit with Genesis 1:1 where it says, in the beginning God created? You know, we've always kind of conceptualize that as God speaking and it appearing, well, that's what happened. But there's a process to that. And that's how God does things. Think about this. From the time that the egg is fertilized, it's 9 months before that baby is born as a fully developed mini human being. It's another 18 to 20 years or so before that child is fully mature. God takes years to develop us from conception to a fully developed, physically and psychologically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, a human being. God does things in beautiful ways. I remember a bumper sticker I saw years ago, I never forgot, and it said, "Babies, a great way to start people." It's always stuck with me. And so I believe that this is how God went about it. So prior to that, as I've mentioned, was the steady state theory, that the universe has always existed as it is, and that there's no change, it had no beginning, and no cause was necessitated. That fell right into the hands of unbelievers, atheists, and Darwinists. So when they came upon this information, this evidence that there was a Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago, that was a disaster for the steady state unbelievers. Because suddenly they had scientific evidence that they could not refute that there was a beginning. And it said it right there in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning. And they hate that. And they hate that. And you'll read attacks still on this theory, and there will always be attacks on it. And so the first thing when you look at the Big Bang is that it says there was a beginning, and there was a beginning at a specific point in time. God created time and space at that point. And just like Genesis says. And it was God's power and creativity, and He spoke it into existence. The old rabbis swear that He spoke it in Hebrew. I don't think He literally spoke necessarily. He created. He willed it, whatever. And so here's Fred Hoyle again, who coined the phrase the Big Bang. And on March the 28th, 1949, he was an atheist, as I said, a strong proponent of the steady state theory. And he says every cluster of galaxies, star, atom had a beginning, but the universe itself did not. It flew in the face of his denial of God, you see, by finding out that there was a beginning. And so this man, Michael George Strauss, is as you see, an experimental particle physicist and evangelical Christian. And he says, given the evidence, in my opinion, not believing in the Big Bang is like believing the earth is flat. To me, the idea is that strong. The Big Bang is the origin of everything we know, space, time, matter, and energy. So here's a man who's brilliant, obviously, PhD in experimental particle physics and a believer. And he says, the evidence is overwhelming. From a scientific perspective, and he accepts that. And so here's a man, I'll show you him in the next slide, but this is a quote from him. He said, even as an atheist, I did not believe something extra-natural occurred. The Big Bang, everything came from nothing. If nature is defined as everything we see in our environment, then there had to be something before that, a first cause that was beyond space, matter, and time. That meant that cause couldn't be spatial, material, or temporal. I realized that if there was something extra-natural that caused the beginning of all space, time, and matter, as recorded in Genesis 1:1, then that same cause could accomplish all miracles recorded in the Gospels. He became a Christian and a hard worker. And J. Warner Wallace, legendary homicide investigator, who became a youth pastor after he was saved, a church planter, and adjunct professor of Bible apologetics. And he said that was one of the things that convinced him of the truth of the Scriptures and led him to Christ when he learned about the Big Bang and all those things that went with it. Well, Einstein, as I talked about, and his theory of general relativity, he believed in the static. Einstein was Jewish, an unbeliever, and he believed that there was no expanding universe, it was all static. And so it began really with this man, Alexander Friedman, who died in 1925, a Russian mathematician who began working with Einstein's theories and mathematical formulas, and he used mathematics to prove that the universe is expanding. So we only learned this about 100 years ago, the expansion, ongoing expansion of the universe. And it's still expanding from the time of the Big Bang. It don't expand at the same rate it did initially. And so this man, who was both an astronomer and a priest, he came up with the theory that the universe started as a single point very long ago, based on his study of the expansion of the universe and what we were seeing. The universe stretched and expanded to its present size, and it would keep on expanding. So that totally refutes the steady state theory of the universe. And there's no doubt about that now. There's no question about that. We can see clearly now the universe expanding. And that speed now is picking up. And so here's another man that began expanding and working on that. And some of the great men, Roger Penrose, Stephen Hawking, and others. This man, George F.R. Ellis, they came to the conclusion, because of scientific research, yes, it's expanding. And so with the advances in telescope technology, we could see more and more evidence of it. And that's increasing all the time, because for the longest time, telescopes were confined to the terrestrial Earth. Now we send them out there, the most powerful ever, and we got computers and AI, and they can see things that we could never imagine. And they see things all the time. You read about it, where scientists say we have no idea what this is or how this is happening, but we see it. We don't know what that is out there, way out there. And here's Carl Hubble, for whom the Hubble telescope was named. And he discovered what's called the red shift in light from distant galaxies. Now, you're talking about here light waves. Light is waves. And waves of light are different lengths. And those different lengths determine color. By the way, that's one of the things that God gave us. If you stop and think about it, He gave us color. Look at Ray's shirt. I mean, I think if everything was black and white, how dull that would be. He gave us all this beautiful color, the blue sky, the green grass, the turquoise waters, the white sand. So the longest wavelengths of light is in the red shift. They're red. And because of the movement of the galaxies, the distant galaxies, we can see those red shift, and it can be measured. It's remarkable. Remarkable that men have the capacity to do that, and yet men who can do that, their brain, God created. And it's corrupted by sin, and they still can do this. What has God done? And what is He showing us? So now here's what happened with cosmic background radiation. Now these things are scientific terms, and they can be hard to understand. But these two men, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, in 1964, were conducting experiments about something else. I forget what it was, but they kept getting this static feedback in their highly sensitive equipment from anywhere they looked in the cosmos. And so they consulted with other people, and they determined that they had discovered what they call the cosmic background radiation, which is now 450 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 450 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's the leftover heat from the Big Bang. You say, wait a minute, leftover heat at minus 450 degrees Fahrenheit? Yes, because initially at the point of the Big Bang, that heat was infinite, which we can't conceive of. the density was infinite because God created it right there and then He released it somehow. And so this cosmic background radiation that can be clearly picked up and discerned now from any direction in the cosmos, they were able to measure the temperature and found that it was that cold, which over 13.7 million years would cool to that temperature. So it's exactly as it should be, they tell us. And so they can see that. And they've sent up spacecraft to measure that, the cosmic background radiation. And here's his partner. They couldn't eliminate the radio signal, and they eventually determined, wait a minute, we picked up something else. So it was totally by accident that they discovered this, and it was revealed to them. So as I told you before, at the beginning of the Big Bang, there were two elements. There was hydrogen and helium. Now, it was hydrogen that burned up what was that big airship, 1937 in New Jersey, the German airship, the name of the Hindenburg. That's what they were using to fly. It's extremely light. And so, helium it's lighter than air. And then the next one was hydrogen, then the next one was helium. And by the way, I left out one. At the beginning, when there was just hydrogen and helium, there was also lithium. So all of you carry lithium around with you all the time now. Keep your cell phone working, the battery in your cell phone. There was also lithium at that time. Why, I don't know, but there was. And then what's called the nucleosynthesis of elements. They're exactly as they should be, 1 part in 10,000. We can't exist without those elements, of course. And so equations based on the Big Bang model predict the amounts of light elements so accurately that scientists see it as proof this theory is correct. And keep in mind when you look at this that these scientists who agree don't believe in the Bible, most of them. They don't believe in God. They don't believe a God exists. If you ever watch that silly TV program, The Big Bang Theory, what was his name? Sheldon Cooper was an atheist because he was a theoretical physicist, and that fit, the character fit. And so you got men and women who hate God who are discovering these things and revealing it to us. And then the galaxy formation. Our solar system, we done covered that. Scientists can see so far that they are looking back in time because light takes time to travel. So some of these things that we're seeing existed billions of years ago. That can be measured. But because the light is just now arriving here. So what else is there out there that the light hadn't got here yet? Still traveling to 186,230 miles per second. Coming this way that we're going to see. And so we have photographic evidence that early galaxies look different, meaning the steady state model of the universe is wrong. Most of those ancient galaxies and stars and formations we see out there, they're long gone. They've been gone for some of them for billions of years. But the light is just now getting here where we can see it. And so if you read about nova, nova is when a great star dies and explodes, creates quasars, and they can be measured exactly. But we don't see that until sometimes billions of years after that occurs. And there's the light years, I said, I won't go into that, but light travels at let me get this right here, 5,878,625,370,000,000, I believe it's right, I may be off there. In other words, it's fast. And it could circle the earth 7.5 times in a second. The speed of light. And so light and the constant speed of light is something we can use to measure these distances and these other things. Here's the Hercules globular cluster. It's 25,000 light years from Earth, meaning that we're seeing it now. 25,000 years after light left it. Billions of years old, formed early in the universe. And there's a closer look at it from the James Webb Space Telescope. Talking about a concentration of stars and galaxies. By the way, our Milky Way galaxy is believed to contain 100 billion stars. And there are hundreds of billions of galaxies of different sizes. And the Bible says that God has named every one of them. Becky asked me when we was talking about this one time, if I thought one of them might be Leroy. I said, I don't know. But they got a name. She's smart at it, by the way. She's watching. I touched on this too, gravitational waves. I think I touched on that this morning, or maybe I touched on gravitational lensing. They found a long-predicted twist in light from the Big Bang that represents the first image of ripples in the universe called gravitational waves, direct proof of the theory of inflation. The signal is coming through much more strongly than expected. Inflation here, pertaining to the Big Bang, is the milliseconds after the Big Bang. There was a period that's called inflation. And in that time, they said that as the Big Bang occurred, that all of the dense components of the universe that we have today and we've had for all these years were confined to that little dot. And they suddenly burst forth. And they moved at a rate many times the speed of light as the universe was being formed. That's the God we serve, spoke that. And so that's known as inflation, because the inflation it blew up, in other words. It's not like an explosion, it's just like suddenly it appears. And moved along at an incredible speed, and still is, after all these years. And these are some designs, I'll go past them, of how they try to explain the Big Bang. Inflation is back there where you see quantum fluctuations and so on. The afterglow light pattern, I mentioned that at about 375,000 years, was when the first light appeared. The light was there from the beginning, but it was confined by the concentrated mass of material. And they think at about 375,000 years, it was expanding through inflation at such an incredible speed that the density of that material lessened to the point that the light could burst forth. So that may have been when God said, let there be light. But then there was another time at about 300 million years, 350 million years, where the stars suddenly ignited. So it could have been one or both of those when God said to let there be light. And from the time, as you see there, it points out the dark ages. That period of time was about that 350 million years. And everything was dark. And the Bible says, Genesis says, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And that was deep. And then, at about 375 million years, the stars formed and ignited and lit up the universe. From one end to the others, it was expanding at incredible rates. These giant first-generation helium, hydrogen, lithium stars lit up. So, that may have been when God said, let there be light. At least I think that. So the singularity, you've heard the term singularity if you've ever read about black holes and so forth. That just simply means that it's so tiny that it can't be detected. And so all matter in the cosmos, all of space itself, existed in a form smaller than a subatomic particle, which cannot be seen with naked eye. Some of that can't be seen with the most powerful microscopes. That's why we have the great colliders that have recently discovered the, what is it? You preached on it one Sunday. We couldn't remember the name of it, and I can't again. Bosons. Bosons. They're so small they can't be seen, but through these big colliders, they can have particles to collide coming at each other in different directions, each of them at almost the speed of light. And that collision is so intense that for a millisecond, a nanosecond, they can see the bosons. And those bosons, they're part of whatever, all of this is bosons, everything that God created. But they move from their original state to whatever material they make up. And so when they collide them and they can detect them only for a nanosecond, they go back to their original state and then they immediately go back to what they were before. And they call that the God particle. Unbelievers studying this stuff labeled it the God particle. Who was the great English scientist that theorized that? Anyway, it slips me right now. And that's a singularity of what occurred just before the Big Bang. And so I mentioned this man, Max Planck. He was a German physicist. He was also a devout Christian, one of the rare ones. And so they named this first epoch when the Big Bang occurred from 0 seconds to 10 to the minus 43 power second. The Planck epoch, and you can see what the number is. At this moment, the universe was a tiny speck of extreme temperature and mass. The moment that God created, I believe. So they named it after him. And so I'll stop there because I'll run past stuff a little bit. But they can measure these epochs, they call them, in incredibly small periods of time. And they can tell you what happened then in the expansion and development, the inflation and development of the universe, the cosmos. What do you think? Think that might be right? Well, it fits perfectly with what God revealed to us in Genesis, everything. And as I said before, to me, it makes God so, my conception or my attempt to conceive of God is so much greater, so much more majestic, magical, wonderful, because He did this in these ways. And I believe that now, in our lifetimes, He's saying, okay, you've had Genesis all these millennia, going back to Moses and beyond. I'm going to let you know a little more about how I did this, because you live in an age of such skepticism and unbelief. And when you stand before me having seen these things, you'll have no excuse if you've rejected my Son. And by the way, it was His Son who did this. It was Jesus who did this. The first chapter of John says that He made all things. And nothing was made that He did not make. This was Jesus Christ, who became Jesus Christ, the second person in the Godhead, who would become a man and die on a cross for us, who did this. Question, comment? Anybody disagree? Bold enough to say? I'll end with this. I also believe, and I've thought about this a long time and prayed over this a long time. I believed at this point in time we have reached a point where the people who make up our congregations now can look at this and objectively consider it. An older generation here, they'd have thrown me out them doors right there, buddy. I guarantee you. They would have said to me, sit down, son, you're out of order. I heard them say that a time or two here. I heard a deacon stand up in the church at the end of a service one day and say to the chairman of deacons standing right up here, brother, you're out of order. Sit down and cease. And everybody filed out of the church and said not a word. They would say that to me today, I'm sure. All righty. Thank you all for coming. I see you're not going to comment or ask a question, so I'll end. Thank you all for being here. Let me see here. Stacia, would you mind leading us in prayer? Are you ready?